Hello, Kristen.
Hi, Greg.
You're here again.
We're here we are again. So we're going to talk. This is like part two
It
of
is part two.
foundations of effective leadership.
It's true. Yeah. And
So,
it feels important to say that, like, most of what we're going to talk about in this podcast is going to have to do with leadership in one way or another.
mhm,
We're going to be coming in and out of it, but this is definitely kind of a deep dive into foundations, as you say.
yeah.
So,
So one, I've been thinking since our last episode, because obviously
yes,
we're recording this on a different day.
I know.
So I've been thinking, and one of the things that I thought about that I think is an important leadership characteristic is
Hmm.
tenacity. And
Yes.
I've been having to be tenacious with a project I'm working on right
Yeah.
now. I know you've been very tenacious in building out your business over the last year.
Yeah.
So tell me your thoughts on tenacity.
I think that, and I'll use an example because it stuck with me, and it was many years
Hmm.
ago. I worked at the time for a wilderness school, so
Okay.
worked with kids in a wilderness setting, and the director of the organization she decided to make a shift to the
Hmm.
population that we were serving, and still serving kids at need, but a different shift. And I remember at the time she sort of presented that to the various staff that worked for her, and we were all against it. We thought it was a
Yeah.
terrible idea. And she had a vision, and she had done her research. And I think tenacity, when I think of tenacity, I think now of how she presented that to us. She needed our input and wanted our input, but the decision was hers to make, and she made it. It was the right decision. We just didn't know it for about a year. It didn't really show
Hmm.
up in the transformation of the organization in a year. And if she had given in to the conflict, to the opposition that we presented, I don't know what would have happened. I don't think the organization would have survived in the long term. So when I think of tenacity, that's what I think of. Like, in the face of people who disagree, in the face of
Hmm.
an environment that is just difficult, in the face of, like, feeling very sort of alone as a leader, tenacity is, I think, what separates those who make it from those who don't.
I agree. And I think that shows up on leadership teams too, because, if you are on an executive leadership team, right, you're there and you represent your department, you're the expert on that one niche function inside the organization. And everybody else has different niche functions that they're responsible for. And sometimes you have to stand up for your team in a way that everybody else disagrees with. And you have to keep standing up for it. And
Yeah.
even though you're in a team, it still feels very lonely. And
Yes.
yeah, and so I like what you just said about it can feel very lonely.
Yeah.
Even when you're in a group, it can feel very lonely sometimes. But
Yeah.
definitely if you're like an entrepreneur, it feels lonely a
Yeah.
lot of times. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's so important because you have to have a compelling view of things to be a strong leader. And I think sometimes what holds people back from getting to the next level in their career, going from manager to leader, is that they don't have that strong opinion or compelling vision that
Yeah.
drives them. And
Yeah.
they just kind of want to go where the wind blows, or
Yeah.
they're very focused below them in the organization and they haven't kind of brought their vision up yet.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that the vision part that you're talking about, I completely agree. And, you are an entrepreneur and have been for now many, many years, and I'm relatively new, but in an entrepreneurial space as well. And I think that this idea of a vision and the loneliness of it, we're making it sound so appealing. Everyone is going to want to be, I want to be a leader like
Don't
Craig
you want
and
to be a
Kristen
lonely
talk
leader?
about. You'll be
Come
lonely
on,
forever
join
and no
us.
one will agree with you. It's going to be awful. Just kidding. I mean, mostly not kidding. Um, but that vision is a really important one. And as
Hmm.
I think now, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the work I've done over many years in leadership development and coaching and supporting people moving from sort of manager roles into leader roles. And, you know, even in large organizations, it was exactly what you're describing, which is someone who has a vision that is unique or is new
Hmm.
or is maybe risky, And sometimes that vision is really successful, and sometimes it's not. I've seen leaders
Hmm.
flame out, not because they were bad, not because they didn't know what they were doing, but because their particular vision just didn't work, or they didn't have the time for it to work. So there's
Yeah.
there's some risk there as well. And again, back to this point of tenacity, it's that, right? It's I'm going to take I'm going to take this department into a new place. So using myself
Hmm.
for an example. So I led a learning and development team some years ago that was
Hmm.
responsible for customer training and employee training, and the customer training for this software was kind of awful. I mean, it was like, we would bring users in within the customer organizations, and the users would sit in like 8 hours of training for like 3 weeks, and then we would leave. And
Hmm.
so, like, nobody can learn that way, and
Yeah.
so I said, we're going to rebuild it. We're going to have it. We're going to structure it so that there are shorter modules. There's a lot of practice in between. We're going to create a safe sandbox for them to try things out. And it it was not met with a lot of, I guess, love and support in the organization. And so, in the absence of tenacity, it would have been really easy to do what we've always done, right? That's
Yeah.
the what that non-tenacious leader ends up being faced with is, we're just going to do what we've always done. It's just easier.
Yeah. It is
So
easier, but it's not always the right thing.
tell me about how tenacity shows up for you in your, I mean, you run a business
Hmm.
that you have built over several years now.
Hmm.
And but what is how does tenacity show up for you there?
I mean, at a very basic level, and this is, it's funny when people contact me and they're like, I want to hear all about what it's like to be a consultant." I'm like, "Okay, I'll tell you, but I'm going to tell you the real deal." And the real deal is you've got to get yourself out of bed in the morning. No one else is going to hold you accountable for
Yeah.
getting yourself out of bed, going to work, even if that's in your basement or in my case, in my little home office, which is this tiny little closet of a room I'm sitting in right now. And I make myself get up, put on professional clothing, go treat it like a job.
Sure.
And as an entrepreneur, I think that's what tenacity is like treat your business like a job and
Yeah.
not like a hobby. And it took me about a year to kind of learn that. I
Yeah.
had to take it really seriously if I was going to make it work.
Yeah.
And that's tenacity. I think tenacity for me as an executive earlier in my career, really showed up um, in a lot of different ways, but it was kind of like what you described, just sticking to your guns on things that you've decided.
Yeah.
And and also, being willing to take risks
Yeah.
and um, and make change when you do have opposition to that. And it kind of
Mm.
goes along with integrity, which is another word you and I batted around
Yeah.
before
Say more about that.
this. And I'll give you an example of this one. So, at the company I worked for before I started this Success League, I was a vice president. And at that point in time, I really, 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 really wanted to be a chief operating officer. And that was going to be my next career move. That I was very focused on that. And through a lot of political things that happened in the company outside of my area, the chief revenue officer was let go.
Hmm.
And they were the person that was managing the San Francisco office, which is where I worked.
Mm-hmm.
And the board had to make a tough decision because of some of what went down, that some people in the company were going to get laid off.
Hmm.
And the CEO of the company approached me and said, "Hey, Kristen, we have to make a tough choice. We either have to lay off across the organization, or we could lay off just the San Francisco team and let everybody go and get rid of that office, which is a big expense." He said, if we decide to, as a leadership team, keep both offices, would you be the chief operating officer and run the San Francisco office? And
Holy
I
mackerel.
wanted I wanted that so bad. I mean,
Yes.
just selfishly, I
Yes.
was like, oh, this is like exactly what I want. But what it would have meant is it would have meant a bunch of people in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is not a tech town
Yeah.
for them, at least not at the time. It is
Sure.
more so now, but it's still not like San Francisco tech town. And it would have meant a bunch of people getting laid off there and in San Francisco. And it would have meant we still had this massive monthly expense for as a company of this office that was in this beautiful part of town and costing us a fortune. And we would have been way too small for it, really, because we would have, had to lay off some people in San Francisco still too. And what I knew is that if we laid off people in San Francisco, they would have jobs within the week if they wanted them.
Yeah.
And I knew that if we laid off people in Pittsburgh, it would take them half a year to find a job that was
Yeah.
comparable. And so as much as I selfishly wanted this job, I
Yeah.
knew that it was not the right thing for the company.
Yeah.
And I had to, I had to tell the CEO that as much as I wanted that and I would have really loved it, and I would have done a great job
I
with
was gonna
it
say, and
too.
would have knocked it out of the park.
I
Yeah.
still don't think it was the right decision for the company, even in now, what, a decade worth of hindsight. It
Yeah.
wouldn't have been the right decision for the company. It wouldn't have been the right decision for the people or the team. And hanging on to that office was just a giant waste of money.
Yeah.
And so, so I said, no, I don't think we should do that. And that was that was really hard because it was like, not like it was like you're sacrificing yourself and what you really, really want for
Yeah.
what's right. And that's integrity, I think.
I
Yeah.
think so. Thank you for that. And that I agree that that's integrity. And so what I'm interested in doing is kind of unpacking that a little bit because
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that
It's
like
like going to be a therapy session.
suddenly it felt like that. Yeah, I think I feel like unpack is one of those like let's create space for um but there's the thing about integrity is that like I would, I think everyone thinks they have it. Doesn't matter. Everyone
Mhm.
thinks they have it.
Yeah.
You and I worked for a company a really long time ago,
Yes.
where the company was sold
Uh-huh.
and there were layoffs across the company
Yep.
and they were handled very inelegantly. And one of the
That's a nice way of putting
I was
it.
going
Yeah.
to say, I'm trying to, yeah. Let's go with inelegantly.
Inelegant.
It's yes, let's because that's easier. And on the day that in a different office, in the office in Texas, I don't know if
Mhm.
you remember this. I remember this. On the day that those people were packing up their desks, the CEO that had just sold the company and lived close to that office brought by his new Porsche to show to everyone who was there. Do you remember that?
I vaguely remember
Oh,
you telling me about this,
yes.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
So brought it by and sort of this like, hey, look, like, isn't this a great new car? And so there's any number of problems with that, right? So, read the room,
Yeah.
whatever else. And I think that that individual believes that they have integrity, and maybe in other circumstances they do, but in that moment, that their inability or unwillingness to sort of think of the ramifications of the actions they had taken. They are the
Hmm.
ones that sold the company. They are the ones that took action to make the layoffs so the company could look short-term profitable,
Hmm.
differently profitable for the sale. So the reason I bring that up is that there's something about when I think of integrity, I think of like the actions that you take, and maybe it's in your example, you took an action that was not in your personal best interest, but you
Hmm.
actually took the best interest of the company. So what if you would say like what's the how do you know if you're acting with integrity or not? It-
I mean, I think it's tough to say because I think, whereas in some situations you might act with integrity and others you might not. I think different people behave
yeah,
differently in different
yeah.
situations. It's a hard one. And I think one thing is, are you showing empathy to everybody involved? And I honestly think this is why customer success people make really good leaders a lot of times, is because they
Hmm.
have kind of empathy as something that is very
Hmm.
important to them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, And are you thinking beyond just yourself is really a piece of it,
Yeah,
you know. But
I
but
think
I
that's it.
don't
I
think
would agree.
everybody is always showing integrity in every single part of their lives, or
Yes.
like we're not perfect, we're
No,
humans. So,
no.
like
And if you
also,
were in a
yeah,
different, if you were in a different position, like to have integrity doesn't, like it's not like a thing you get, like,
yeah,
I have this purple shirt and that I have it forever until I throw it away.
yeah,
Uh, it's moment by moment. And to your point, like if when you were offered that opportunity, if you had, let's say, different layers, right, of pressure. One was you wanted to buy a new home or a new car, right?
yeah.
And this new role would afford that, right? So you might then decide in your own favor. And maybe that's still not acting in integrity in that example. Or
Hmm.
maybe you have a parent that is in, or a child in need
Hmm.
of medical care that you can't otherwise afford without this new. Well, then
Hmm.
okay, now it's murkier. But the point I hear you making that I agree with is like in those moments when we are faced with a seemingly difficult decision, it's when you include the needs of other people, when you act from a place
Hmm.
of empathy. um I think that becomes a hallmark of integrity.
Yeah, I do think it is sort of the root is in the thinking of other people and
Yeah,
how your actions impact others.
yeah.
And to me, if I had to boil it down, I think that's what I come back to.
I would agree. I think that my mind immediately goes to trying to prove or disprove that point, and I end up in places like, if you're an accountant and you work with numbers and you discover like a flaw, not necessarily something that someone did wrong, but maybe you discover a mistake, and it would be an easy mistake to ignore, but instead you call out the mistake. Now that doesn't immediately look like keeping up with the needs of others, but of course it is, because allowing that mistake to persist means that somebody's going to get something that they shouldn't get, good, bad, or indifferent, because of that error in the accounting. So I would agree. I think that
Yeah.
that becomes the hallmark of integrity, is taking actions that include, from a place of empathy, that include the needs of other people.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it was hard. The whole San Francisco team had to be let go. And
Yeah,
and that sucked for them.
yeah,
I
yeah.
will say most of them had jobs within like a week or two.
As you
So,
predicted. Yeah, I
like as much as that sucked, some of them got to enjoy having some paid time off.
was gonna say,
Say,
get a little severance, take a little break.
a little break.
Uh,
Others got
I
back to work right away. The company did not have that
Yeah,
lace hanging over their head. They were able to sublet it really quickly. And
right.
um, you know, I think all in all it came together great. There were hard feelings at the time, and it was
Oh,
not
I'm sure.
an
Yeah,
easy decision. But
yeah.
sometimes that's part of leadership, is making hard decisions
Hmm.
that, don't always benefit you. So
That's
yeah. Okay, let's
um
cut over to the other thing I was thinking about for this
yes,
one, which is more practical and tactical. So,
I love
like
this one. We're gonna need more
understanding
time for this.
financials.
Yeah.
I feel like this is something that I got from my MBA program. This is probably the most important thing I learned in my MBA program, was how to read financial reports and how to
Yeah,
understand how to communicate with other leaders in numbers,
yeah,
and how to model out number, like using Excel.
yeah,
It sounds like an easy thing, but it is such an important part of leadership, because as you're moving up inside a company, you're in a company, and a
yes,
company's job is to make money.
yes,
And, and so you have to understand how the money function of your
yes,
company works, so that you can align all the stuff you're doing as a leader with what you're trying to do financially as a company.
yeah. I think
What's your
that's
take on this? I do think this does need its own episode,
it's
which
gonna
will,
need its own episode,
yeah,
yeah. But and so maybe
I'm going
that's
to add it to the end of our
yeah,
episode.
add it to our episode list, because I completely agree. And the financial piece becomes so critical because, um to exactly your point, we talked about, you have to have a vision. Here's my vision. I'm a leader, and here's my vision. And I'm tenacious, and I have integrity, and that's all really great.
Yeah,
And my vision is completely out of touch with where revenue comes from and where
yeah,
costs go in our organization, right? And so So all of a sudden, I have a vision that is simply not going to be supported. Either if you're in an organization, your vision is not going to be supported by the finance department, which I don't
Yeah.
care where you work. I don't care whether it's very visible or very hidden. The finance department is calling a lot of the shots in your
Yes.
organization because it is the organization's responsibility, first of all, to bring in more money than they spend, bottom line.
Hmm.
And if you're unaware of those two variables, where money comes from and where money goes, you're not going to be able to make decisions that or even propose a vision that a finance person is going to buy into. And if you let's talk about the others, right? I did a bunch of work for a nonprofit a number of years ago, and I had some of the leaders there who were like, "We're different. That money or that revenue and costing doesn't apply to us." Except that the CEO understood that it absolutely applied to them because even though they were nonprofit and they were acting against a mission, they still had to bring in more money than they spent. Otherwise,
Hmm.
they couldn't continue to function. Or even if you have, a one-person solopreneur gig as I do, or a
Hmm.
small consultancy as you do with several employees, you still got to understand that clearly where money comes from, where money goes, or you're not going to last. So doesn't matter what size of organization you're in, doesn't matter the kind of organization you're in. If you don't have a grasp of this finance piece, you're not going to be successful as a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's so important. And I think, you know, luckily, that's something you can learn. That's not
yes.
something you have to be born with. You're not just naturally good at it. Everyone just learns it. And you don't have to go get an MBA to learn it. You can
No.
go on Investopedia and
Yes.
you can look up all this stuff and you can learn it. I mean,
Yeah.
basically, there's three things you need to learn: your cash flow statement, your
Yes.
balance sheet, your P&L.
Yeah.
That's it. If
Yep.
you learn those three things, and then, most companies have some sort of business model
Yep.
that is on a spreadsheet that, looks at where money's coming from and where money's going
Yeah.
to ultimately. And
Yep.
that business model is kind of like the fourth thing. But those first three, those are standard business, statements that you can go look up on Investopedia and learn
Yeah.
all about. And you
Yes.
you can you can take class if you want to take a class on them. You can take classes on Udemy, or you can go on
Yep.
LinkedIn Learning. They have classes on that. Um, little plug for my business. If you go to our leadership program, we have a class on financial statements from a
Nice.
customer success standpoint,
Oh,
like
that's awesome.
how to look at it through that lens. But you have to know this stuff.
You
And
do.
even if you hated math,
Yep.
or even if you think this stuff has nothing to do with you because you're in engineering or whatever,
Whatever.
it
Yeah.
absolutely does. At a
Yes.
leadership level, it does, and you
Yes.
have to know it. So suck it up and go learn. Go learn
Yes.
that stuff.
Exactly what Kristen said.
Yeah.
Suck it up and go learn it. If you want to be an engineer that works on
Yeah.
stuff, maybe you build code, maybe you build material objects, whatever, you build
Yeah.
airplanes. Great. If you want to be that for the rest of your career and you want someone else to be in charge
Yeah.
of you,
Then
do it.
don't be a leader.
Then don't be a leader. But if
Yeah.
what you want to do is step into a leadership role and all these
Yeah.
things we talked about, you've got to understand those basics that Kristen just described. Yeah, suck it up, learn it.
Yeah. Learn it. It's okay. You can learn it. Once you get
Yeah,
into it, it's actually kind of fun.
it kind of
Okay.
is.
Yeah. So next time we're going to talk about building and leading high performing teams.
Yes.
I know you
This
and
is
I are
a
both
thing.
excited about this.
We are
So
both excited about this.
that's gonna be our next episode. So
Yes, it's going to be,
come
and you'll
back.
get to hear in the next episode why we find it both very exciting.
Yes.
Um, so until then,
All
if
right.
this is
Well,
your
thanks,
first time
Greg.
hanging out with us, we're really glad to see you. We don't really see you because that'd be creepy, but
Well,
we're glad that you're here.
that would be creepy. Ooh.
Yes, exactly. We see where you're sitting. Nice job on that picture. Um,
All
thanks,
right.
Kristen. As always, I love
Oh,
doing this
thanks,
with you.
Greg. This was fun.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye.